Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of the Illegitimate Court Counteraction Act, a bill that I am proud to have worked on with my colleague and my friend, Representative Chip Roy, a bill that sanctions international criminal court officials and their families and anybody who is assisting them. Why? Because they are targeting America's allies who are right now the front line of fighting to bring American hostages home from Gaza. America is passing this law because on November 21, 2024, the International Criminal Court's pretrial chamber issued warrants for the arrest of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Israel's former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. Let me explain that in a more detailed way. America is passing this law because a kangaroo court is seeking to arrest the prime minister of our great ally, Israel, who is not only responding to an enemy which conducted a genocide, killing as many men, women, and children as possible, even beheading some of them on October 7, 2024, but an enemy who still holds 100 hostages, scores of bodies of those that they murdered, including 7 of my fellow Americans. Let me say that again. Israel is the tip of the spear in bringing the fight to an enemy who currently holds and has killed our fellow Americans. Israel has conducted this war with as much restraint as war can allow. In the face of horror, they have showed humanity. We know that for Israel, any civilian dying is a tragedy. And we know that for Hamas and the Palestinians who support them, civilians dying is quite literally their strategy for victory. Hamas' strategy uses hospitals and schools as bases for combat operations. Not some fighter accidentally walked into a hospital for 5 minutes carrying their machine gun. No. They build hospitals and schools into fortified launching points for attack. In clear violation of the laws of armed conflict, Hamas deliberately targets civilians. What the ICC is doing with their arrest warrants is legitimizing the false accusations of Israeli war crimes in order to do something. In order to stop the overwhelming success of Israeli military operations. Now, Mr. Speaker, I don't care if a person is a terrorist in a cave or if they are a lawyer in The Hague. If they are getting in the way of bringing home our Americans or bringing home our allies who are, as we speak, in this very moment, bound, blindfolded, tortured, raped, enslaved, starved, facing execution. If you are getting in the way of bringing them home, then we will give you no quarter, and we will certainly not allow you to be welcome to American soil. Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from
Committee on Foreign Affairs will come to order. I ask that everybody in the room, regardless of your position, please rise, join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The purpose of today's hearing is to discuss the misuse of public trust through USAID's woke programming and explore ideas for reorganization to promote a stronger, better, and more prosperous United States. I now recognize myself for an opening statement on this hearing. I can tell you that we are here today very simply because many of the people and many of the programs in USAID have literally betrayed America. My colleagues to my left will say that I'm lying about these programs, and I know they damn well wish that I was lying. The programs that USAID and the State Department has spent money on are indefensible. They hurt America standing around the globe, and I think the fact is clear that America would have been better off if your money had been simply thrown into a fireplace. Instead, the Biden administration spent it imposing their far left-wing ideology onto other nations. Under them, USAID spent $2 million for sex change surgeries in Guatemala, $22 million to increase tourism in Tunisia and Egypt. That's not life-saving. $520 million to pay consultants to teach people in Africa about climate change. That's not medicine. $4.5 million to teach people in Kazakhstan how to fight back against internet trolls. That's not life-saving. $20,000 to help LGBT individuals vote in Honduran elections. That's not medicine. $5.5 million to improve the lives of LGBT individuals in Uganda. $14 million to identify LGBT leaders in Cambodia. $425,000 to train Indonesian coffee companies on how to be more gender-friendly. $15 million for condoms to the Taliban. And I have pages and pages more. That's not diplomacy. It's a slap in the face to every American who got up this morning and went to work. To this moment, you haven't seen or heard any of my colleagues apologizing for this being wrong or wasteful. Instead, for the left, their biggest concern is that the person assembling a team to make sure that these programs are not funded is a billionaire named Elon Musk. So out of touch that they actually believe these programs are bringing other countries closer to us, or that our adversaries are going to gain some kind of foothold if we don't continue doing these programs. That's not what competing looks like for the United States of America. On the contrary, last month, when I participated in a Q&A with my colleague here to the left in the United States Institute of Peace, which will have to explain their funding, the Ugandan ambassador stood up and said these programs were not doing anything to improve relations between our nations. Take a look at the video. Maybe we'll get some audio on it. Maybe we won't get audio on it. Or a 19-year-old, Mr. Burchett. Thank you. Maybe we won't do this video. But I have the video that shows exactly what the Ugandan ambassador was saying. And they were thanking us for not continuing these programs. That's what took place. And that's just one of the countless ambassadors that these programs will not continue, that they're going to come to an end. Yet my colleagues to the left are arguing for these programs to continue, arguing for the people who put these programs in place to go back to work, arguing that the agency that did this be allowed to continue wasting your money. They're going to argue that President Trump doesn't have the authority to do this, but the fact is, of those who were in Congress, all but 3 of them voted to give him the authority in 2024, and it says very specifically in SFOP's approach that the administration may potentially expand, eliminate, consolidate, or downsize covered departments or agencies or organizations. That's the language of the authority. It's not just the content of USAID that is the betrayal. It's the larceny that USAID has conducted. Crooked NGOs around Washington, D.C., swindling American taxpayers out of their money. A recent audit found that USAID's implementing partners were using upwards of 50% of their grants for overhead costs, not life-saving measures. The administration has said that the aid pause is temporary, and they have proven it. The recipients of USAID programs, they can apply for a waiver. I have a list with me. Many have applied, many have been denied, and some have received waivers that actually proved their work was life-saving. Let me give a warning to my colleagues. It will be short-sighted of you if you turn a blind eye to USAID's betrayal and, more broadly, the betrayal within the State Department. Because we are going to bring in the people who put these programs in place. We are going to show to the American people exactly what they were doing. The videos, the documents, the everything. They are going to see it. Like $25,000 for a drag show seminar for Venezuelan migrants in Ecuador, and we are going to show you that video. That's the USAID program spending your money. We will be writing these programs out of law as we conduct our first full State Department review since 2002. I would say that when done right, foreign aid can be one of the best tools. It can help strengthen our relationships with our allies that need a hand up, and it can help countries realize that America is the best partner. But it's only true if we understand a couple of things. What does America actually need from each country or region? What does that country or region actually want from the United States of America? Because it's not these things. And it's only fair to Americans if we can prove that a dollar is better spent going abroad than staying in the pocket of an American who is right now hustling and grinding it out at work. And I now recognize my colleague, Ranking Member Gregory Meeks.
I want to welcome our
BTQ musicals in Ireland. Their time is coming to an end. The chair now recognizes Representative Connolly.
Thank you. And Ted, welcome back. It's good to see you. Mr. Natsios, when you were a administrator, did you oversee an agency that was rife with LGBTQ dances in Ireland and, I don't know, condoms to the tune of 2 million in Gaza and all kinds of iffy, marginal, flaky projects that were funded with U.S. taxpayer money, bringing dishonor to the United States of America? Would that be a fair characterization of AID from your point of view?
Well, it certainly wasn't when I was there. And I don't think it is now myself, but I do think there are programs that I saw on the list that I would not have allowed in my agency.
Well, let's stipulate that, but let's not let that characterize AID, because all of us are losers if that succeeds, it seems to me. Global health. What percentage of AID's work would fall under the rubric of global health? Fighting disease, child maternal health care, or rehydration projects, on and on. Polio, cystic
$8 billion.
What's that?
$8 billion.
$8 billion out of 40?
Out of $38 billion last
Out of
year.
38. So big chunk. What about food security and nutrition
the
programs?
emergency response part of aid is now by far the largest. It's $15 billion. It just amazes me because it's so much more that I had when I was in office.
So 23 of the 38 billion is just those two categories.
That is correct.
And those aren't fringe projects. Those are really life-saving projects.
Yes, they
is that
are.
Fair characterization?
Yes.
And what about disaster relief?
Well, the $15 billion is the food security. Food security for me is the emergency side. Agriculture is separate from that, and that's what I think you're talking about in the longer-term development sense.
But when we're talking about disaster assistance, we're not only talking food.
No.
For example, my fire department is part of a FEMA AID relationship
Right.
where they can go to trouble spots overseas and, again, try to save lives.
Right. I don't know what part of the $15 billion is food versus what we call non-food assistance, which is usually emergency medical care and public health, like immunizing kids in refugee camps and that kind of thing.
So-
I don't know the breakdown.
So let's say one were sincere about wanting to clean up marginal, fringy projects that should never have been funded. Is the way to do that to basically announce we're going to fire 10,000 employees and leave 239 left?
It is not.
And what would be the consequences of depopulating the agency to the tune of 10,000 out of 10,239 employees?
My experience, I've run 7 institutions in the last 50 years now. The 8 officers that I work with were among the smartest and the best managers that I've worked with, and the most creative, because the circumstances they deal with in the developing world are very challenging. I think losing career people is like losing the cadre of the military officers. It's a disaster for the United States.
And the chairman seems to be under the impression that the appropriations bill provides blanket authority to Secretary of State Marco Rubio. I beg to differ. My view is that ultimately AID was established by statute in the Foreign Assistance Act of 1961 as amended. And if you want to dismantle or fold it into another organization, you must get statutory authority from the United States Congress, and we certainly will fight that out. Final point, Mr. Natsios, and maybe Ted Yoho, you may want to comment as well. I'm worried about the vacuum being created by these actions, that China is going to waltz right in there. They're already big actors. Now we, the United States, are going to make them even more so, and I struggle to see how that's in an American interest. Why don't you comment?
It's going to drive people closer to China, Russia, the adversaries, and we see this. But I saw that before, too, with the programs. I had one of the past presidents of Ghana say that if we want aid, but if we have one party from the United States in power, they have a short list. If we have another one, it's a long list. He goes, if we go to China, they say, here's your money. But they said this, I would rather do business with the United States. That's something that we can take advantage, and we need to focus on those things, because that makes us stronger, safer, and more prosperous, not just here, but in those other countries. We need to get back to the basic mission here.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Connolly. Gentleman from New Jersey, Representative Kane is recognized. Thank you, Ms. McClain. Yeah, I could use my minute for a number of things, but I think I'm going to use it now to apologize to all of you in the gallery. I'm sorry. You just literally had to listen to somebody lying to all of you directly. How many times did she say the word billionaire? How many times did she try to say that she was trying to do something, we're trying to do something to enrich billionaires? That's not taking place at all. We're cutting waste, fraud, and abuse. Billions of dollars going to Canadian Lesbian Justice Foundation and transgender sex worker networks in Nepal and a whole list of things. I would say that among the definition of things that we could do to eliminate those programs would be the definition of saving the American taxpayer money. I'm going to leave it at that. They expect you to believe what they say and not believe what you can see with your own eyes. Let the American people be the judge of whether that's saving you money or whether that's enriching billionaires, ending programs like LGBTQI in the Caribbean and the Balkans and Uganda and all the dollars that we put into trying to support those programs. That is waste, fraud, and abuse. Our American tax dollars should not be spent in that way. I'm sorry that they're lying to you in this way, but we're going to work through all this and work to save you all money. Madam,
Gentleman's time's expired.
I yield you back the remainder of any time that I have. Sorry that you lied to, but you're going to expect to hear more of it. Chair, it's clear that USAGM cannot continue to operate as it has in recent times. Drastic measures have to be taken to ensure that every taxpayer dollar works for where those dollars come from. the American people, not Xi Jinping, not Vladimir Putin, not the Ayatollah. I want to thank our witness, Kari Lake, for appearing in front of this committee today. I'm looking forward to hearing your testimony. I'm looking forward to a productive and probably a rowdy discussion about the Trump administration's vision for the future of U.S. broadcasting. And in that, I'm going to recognize my colleague, Ranking Member Meeks, for any opening statement that you may have. Pursuant to notice, I now call up H.R. 1144, the Frederick Douglass Trafficking Victims Prevention and Protection Reauthorization Act of 2025. That's a long title, Chris. The bill was circulated in advance. The clerk shall designate the bill.
H.R. 1144 to reauthorize the Trafficking Victims Protection Act of 2000.
Without objection, the first reading is dispensed with and the bill is considered read and open to amendment at any point. Without objection, the Smith Amendment, in the nature of a substitute, circulated to members in advance, shall be considered as read and will be treated as the original text for purpose of the amendment. I now recognize myself in support of the bill. I want to thank my colleague, Representative Smith from New Jersey, for leading this important bill. I know personally from many discussions that we have how personal this is to him, how close to his heart this is to him. He's been carrying legislation, this and legislation like it for many years. It's constantly something that you work on. You've made it your priority, and I appreciate that and your work to move this across the line. I support this legislation. Trafficking in persons, the buying and selling of human beings, is a horrific form of modern slavery. Between yourself and your co-sponsor, Representative Mfume, leading this effort, I have no doubt that you'll make a difference to the world and what we see taking place all too prevalently. Today, millions are trafficked globally for labor or commercial sex obtained through force or fraud or coercion. Transnational criminals profit off of human trafficking to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars, often stealing directly from Americans. Since 2021, a new and very troubling form of trafficking has emerged as well in Southeast Asia, where Chinese criminal gangs are operating industrial-scale compounds that are devoted solely to conducting online crypto scams. These scam centers are powered by the forced labor of hundreds of thousands of trafficked victims, and they target Americans. Sometimes estimates say Americans were scammed out of over $5 billion in 2024 alone. Last year, I chaired an oversight subcommittee hearing on State Department grants programs, and there I heard from the ambassador at large to monitor and combat trafficking in persons, who testified on the work of the TIP office does to expose and prevent trafficking, prosecute traffickers, and protect victims. The bill before us now, the Frederick Douglass Trafficking Victims Prevention and Protection Reauthorization Act of 2025, it reauthorizes the TIP office and its work and makes common sense amendments to strengthen our anti-trafficking statutes. Ever since Congress passed the original Trafficking Victims Protection Act in 2000, the United States has led the world by example on this issue. Thank you, Mr. Smith. And this year marks the 25th anniversary of the passage of the original Trafficking Victims Protection Acts, also written by Representative Smith. I would urge my colleagues to join me in supporting this bipartisan piece of legislation. Do any other members seek recognition? Ranking Member Meeks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'd like to thank you for bringing up the Frederick Douglass Trafficking Victims Prevention and Protection Reauthorization Act of 2025. This bill is essential to our nation's ongoing efforts to combat the global scourge of human trafficking and uphold the core values of freedom, dignity, and human rights around the world. In the face of the administration's cuts at the State Department and USAID to core institutional mechanisms that address issues related to human rights, including trafficking in persons, passing this bill sends a powerful message that the United States Congress remains steadfast in its commitment to protecting vulnerable populations and advancing human rights globally, honoring the enduring legacy of the great Frederick Douglass in the fight for human dignity. We passed this bill last year, and I think it's time that we get it over the finish line, passing it again getting it through the Senate and on the president's desk to be signed. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Representative yields back. The author of this legislation, Representative Smith, is now recognized.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Chairman. First of all, thank you for putting it on the schedule and for your very strong commitment to this issue of trying to protect women and children and men from modern-day slavery. So thank you very, very much, and for your kind words. And to Mr. Meeks, thank you as well. This year, as you pointed out, Mr. Chairman, marks the 25th anniversary of the Trafficking Victims Protection Act of 2000, comprehensive landmark legislation that I authored that is the cornerstone of U.S. and global anti-human trafficking efforts. I would remind my colleagues that when I first introduced the TVPA in the late 1990s, the legislation was met with a wall of skepticism and even outright opposition. Assistant Secretary of State Harold Koh testified right here in this room that against most of the provisions of that bill. He said that there was no need for a tip office, just put it into the country reports on human rights practices. He said that the sanctions would be counterproductive, which they are not. I pointed out at that time that one reason why our civil rights laws work is because there is a penalty phase for those who do not follow human rights norms and civil rights norms as prescribed in those statutes. We did prevail, and thankfully it was done in a totally bipartisan way, and we did get the bill over the finish line. At the time, trafficking was widely associated with drugs and with weapons, not human beings. I talked to several U.S. attorneys who, as soon as I brought up the subject, they defaulted right to a discussion about weapons and especially about drugs. Back then, stories of women and children being bought and sold and treated as commodities for sale were met with disbelief, but we persisted, and as I said, in a bipartisan way, we got the bill passed in the House, then in the Senate, and then it was signed into law by President Clinton. It established what is now well known, a framework called the 3 Ps: prevention of trafficking, protection for the victims, and prosecution of the traffickers. I would note parenthetically that more than 2,225 major cases have been, traffickers have been convicted and are today doing serious jail time. Even Epstein was being prosecuted pursuant to the TVPA, but he died obviously before justice could be meted out. But so many, and many of our U.S. attorneys, one of the things we put into the bill, Mr. Chairman, was to try to empower states to pass their own anti-human trafficking laws, which virtually every one of them has. So more prosecutors, more weapons against these people who treat people, again, in such a heinous way. The trafficking law created the tip office, the tip report, which continues to hold governments around the world accountable for failing to combat this heinous crime. Today we are considering, and again, I thank you for putting it on the schedule, H.R. 1144, and we honor Frederick Douglass, a man, a heroic man, a brilliant man, and a Republican who was born into slavery, who became one of America's greatest abolitionists. The bill was developed in very close collaboration with his great-great-great-grandson, Kenneth Morris, and shaped by insights and trauma-informed input from survivors and of trafficking. I'm grateful, very grateful, to Democratic lead co-sponsor Kawisi Mafuni for his leadership and deep commitment to ending modern-day slavery, and to colleagues like Chairman Emeritus Michael McCall, Maria Salazar, Joe Wilson, Ms. Radewagen, Brian Jack, Blake Moore, and many others who have joined in this effort. I'd remind my colleagues, and Mr. Meeks mentioned this a moment ago, that this bill has passed the House in the last 2 Congresses, in 2022 and again in 2024, again with broad bipartisan support, over 400 members voting for it, only to stall in the U.S. Senate. And I urge my colleagues to again try a final effort again to get this across the finish line for the victims and to stop this practice. Specifically, it reauthorizes programs across the State Department, Department of Justice, Homeland Security, and the Department of Health and Human Services. It continues the Angel Watch program to prevent convicted child sex predators from exploiting and raping children overseas. Megan Kanka, the little girl, International Megan's Law is what we call it, was from my hometown of Hamilton. A convicted pedophile lived across the street from her, invited her into his home, brutally raped her, killed her, buried her, and then he went out and handed out brochure saying, do you know where Megan is? That led to Megan's Law in all 50 states, which has had a very profound impact. And then we found out that many of these people who are convicted travel on these child sex tourism trips, and they rent a child for a week or two and exploit the living daylights out of them. This now notices countries of destination before they leave and also stamps their passport with information that says the bearer is a child sex predator and has been convicted for that. It also enhances, and this is not part of our jurisdiction, Mr. Chairman, but it is jointly referred to some other committees, which I believe will waive, to provide situation awareness training for elementary and secondary school students so they can be aware and know what the signs are so that they're not trafficked. Again, I want to thank you so much for this, and I yield back.
Representative Yields. Any further discussion? Anything over here? No. Representative Kane is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am pleased to support this important legislation, the Frederick Douglass Trafficking Victims Prevention and Protection Reauthorization Act of 2025. Human trafficking is a terrible atrocity, and survivors never fully escape the trauma of their trafficking. In my home state of New Jersey, tireless advocates continue to push for justice for these victims. This bipartisan legislation is an important step in protecting the victims of this horrible crime. It will ensure grant funding is provided to help American communities recognize and respond to trafficking. Additionally, it will allocate funding to help educate and to employ survivors of human trafficking. Through this legislation, we can take an important step in the fight against human trafficking. I thank their colleagues for their partnership, and I urge this committee to support this important legislation. Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Any further discussion? There being no further discussion of the bill, the committee will move to consideration of amendments. Does any member wish to offer an amendment? Seeing none, I move that the committee report H.R. 1144 as amendment to the House with a favorable recommendation. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed signify by saying no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the motion is agreed to. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table, and staff is authorized to make any technical and conforming changes. Pursuant to notice, I now call up H.R. 3613, the Streamlining Foreign Military Sales Act of 2025. The bill was circulated in advance, and the clerk shall designate the bill.
H.R. 3613 to amend the Arms Export Control Act to streamline foreign military sales under that act.
Without objection, the first reading is dispensed with, and the bill is considered read and open to amendment at any point. And I will now recognize myself in support of the bill. We've spoken a lot about foreign defense sales and how they've skyrocketed in the past several years. As the global threat landscape evolves, our partners and allies are increasingly turning to the United States to procure not only American defense systems, but also American training and equipment, because it's the best. Hands down, there's nothing better out there anywhere across the globe. The United States remains the partner of choice for our foreign allies, but slow delivery timelines and bureaucratic red tape undermine our ability to keep up with the increasing demand for U.S.-made systems. A single FMS case can take years to receive the necessary approvals from the U.S. government, and each FMS case requires considerable effort from U.S. officials at the State Department and Department of Defense to prepare. The dollar threshold that determine which defense sales cases need congressional approval have not been updated since the year 2003, despite rising inflation and rapidly increasing demand. President Trump called attention to this matter on April 9th executive order, which required the interagency to consider raising the threshold levels to reduce bureaucratic red tape and speed up the foreign defense sales process. As part of the work of the Arms Sales Task Force, Representative Zinke's legislation to update the congressional notification threshold to levels requested by President Trump would maintain congressional oversight powers while reducing red tape and expediting process for our foreign arms sales. I would like to now ask, do any other members seek recognition in support? Yes. Representative Jacobs is still recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Rarely in my years in Congress have I seen legislative proposals that actually reduce Congress and this committee's oversight ability on consequential national security matters. But this bill is one such case. It is now more important than ever for Congress to assert itself and stand up to increasing executive power, overreach, and maintain its important responsibility to check the power of the executive. I cannot support this measure that would decrease congressional oversight ability. This bill amends the Arms Export Control Act by significantly increasing congressional notification dollar thresholds for major arms sales required to be notified and reviewed by Congress. Representative Zinke's bill either doubles or triples in certain categories the threshold at which major arms sales or other types of defense transfers would be notified to Congress. Higher thresholds mean less oversight and visibility for Congress, as any sales that fall below the dollar value threshold are not notified or reviewed by Congress at all. Even at the current notification levels, without this bill's increases, in 2020, the State Department Inspector General found that over a 4-year period, the State Department provided more than $11 billion in below-threshold sales to Saudi Arabia and the UAE, including weapons Congress had placed holds on due to legitimate concerns over civilian casualties and egregious human rights violations. Much as we saw with the effort last year to move similar legislation, both incorrectly pins partner country frustration with slow U.S. arms deliveries to the congressional review process when, in fact, most significant delays are due to an obsolete, outmoded defense contracting system that piggybacks on top of numerous defense manufacturing constraints and inefficiencies by the industry itself. Notably absent from the conversation and claims made by industry is the continued destruction of our State Department and the summary firing of over 1,300 hardworking Americans without cause. At no point did the Trump administration, either through its arms sales executive order or the minimal consultation with committee about such proposals, ever address the staffing needs or increased budget to lessen strained political military affairs bureau workloads. While my majority colleagues may be quick to claim that the political military affairs functions have been spared the worst cuts of the administration's shameful mass firings, that does not address short-staffed offices and teams there. Let's not kid ourselves. Rubio's cuts at the department will make these delays worse. You cannot do more with less. And worse, this bill further weakens congressional oversight over arms sales as the Trump administration actively undermines the legislative branch at every turn, bypassing congressional review of sensitive arms sales on multiple occasions and seeking corrupt pay-to-play deals. By raising the threshold amounts as the bill proposes, Congress will lose visibility on what arms are being transferred to what countries, struggle to ensure that transfers are consistent with U.S. law, policy, and interests. So I oppose this bill and its objectives, which undercut the oversight functions of this committee. I yield back.
Is there any further discussion? Representative Jayapal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This bill is another attempt by Republicans to shield the president's corruption from accountability and weaken the already limited checks and balances that exist for arms sales. This administration doesn't seem to want to answer for the lethal weapons it's sending, doesn't seem to want to answer to Congress, not to the public, and certainly not to the people that these weapons are used against. They know that if Congress were allowed to weigh in, many of these sales, including to serial human rights abusers, would never pass scrutiny. So they're doing the only thing they can to avoid accountability, trying to hide the deals altogether. These notifications of arms sales give Congress the ability to weigh in and conduct oversight into the lethal weapons that we send abroad. By raising the reporting threshold by tens of millions of dollars, the president will be able to send billions of dollars in weapons, including drones, bombs, surveillance tools, to foreign governments without even a whisper to Congress. Already, the majority of weapons sold through direct commercial sales fall under the existing notification thresholds, meaning that Congress never actually sees them. And with this bill, even more deals, including deadly ones, would be buried from public view. This isn't streamlining, it's whitewashing. Let's talk about what's already happened under Donald Trump's presidency. Earlier this year, he took a trip to the UAE. He got wined, dined, and bribed by Emirati officials. And when he returned, his administration quietly bypassed Congress, notifying billions of dollars in weapons sales to the Emiratis without adhering to the committee review process that has long been considered best practice. This administration rushed forward with the sale despite credible evidence linking UAE weapons supplies to the brutal RSF militia in Sudan because it was in the best interest of the president, not of the American people. This undermines democratic accountability, and it highlights another aspect of this administration's corruption. Even though Congress was cut out of the decision to send weapons of war, at least we knew it was happening, so we could attempt to use legislative tools to block sales that aren't in Americans' best interests. Earlier this year, I joined Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib in introducing joint resolutions of disapproval to block the sale of specific offensive weapons to Israel. These sales included bulldozers that have been used to flatten Palestinian homes, JDAM guidance kits that have been used to target civilians, schools, and hospitals, and 2,000-pound bombs with a blast radius so large that they cannot be used in densely populated areas like Gaza without inflicting mass civilian casualties. While these attempts were blocked, they at least provided the American people with transparency about what was happening and the U.S. role in providing these weapons. That is far from sufficient. We need to respond to these atrocities with restraint, with a true assessment of how to ensure that any government upholds our own laws and international humanitarian laws. Instead of that, however, Congress is now being asked to loosen the rules and let even more weapons flow with even less oversight. Republicans are trying to tell the American people that oversight is somehow too cumbersome, that transparency slows things down too much, the checks and balances that are built into these processes are not necessary, and that all power should be concentrated in the hands of the president and his administration. This kind of impunity from oversight is what endangers our credibility and our democratic processes. This bill is not just misguided, it's dangerous. It gives cover to future presidents, Democrat or Republican, who want to green-light shady arms deals behind closed doors and flood foreign battlefields with U.S. arms entirely off the books. It's a gift to dictators, a green light for war profiteers, and a direct attack on Congress's oversight. It lets the defense industry write foreign policy and tells the world that the United States is more interested in hastily selling bombs than in protecting human rights. So if you believe in the checks and balances our democracy was founded on, vote no. If you believe in congressional authority and Article I powers, vote no. If you believe in human rights, vote no. And if you believe that no president should be able to sell weapons to autocrats without so much as a cursory notice to Congress, vote no. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Any further discussion? Representative Zinke is now recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the Chairman and Ranking Member for the consideration of H.R. 3613, the Bipartisan Streaming Foreign Military Sales Act of 2025. From Europe to Indo-Pacific, partner nations are increasingly turning to the United States for the tools they need to deter aggression and defend their sovereignty and stabilize the region. There's a reason why U.S. military hardware is highly sought after, because it's effective. FMS by U.S. companies exceeded $115 billion. That's up from $80.9 billion in 2023. When factoring it in as far as direct military sales and FMS, that exceeds what the Department of Defense spends for their equipment. The supply chain in the United States could not operate without foreign military sales and direct commercial sales. These figures underscore the urgency felt by nations throughout the globe amid changing global security paradigms, where equipment changes, generations changes within weeks and sometimes months, but never years, and our procurement system is widely outdated. Within the FMS and DCS processes, magnitudes more of arms sales are from that program than defense. As far as oversight goes, every decision still goes through the same rigorous processes of approval, human rights evaluations, and other units and agencies monitored, to include the Department of State, Blue Lantern, and Department of Defense, Golden Century. If you don't know what the Leahy laws are, then I suggest you look them up. Congress has never successfully blocked an arms sales. Congressional notification has not been updated since 1976 in some cases. What we've created is a bureaucracy, a nightmare for companies. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to enter the record as a statement of support from the Aerospace Industries Association and a detailed listing almost in every member's jurisdiction and areas are absolutely small companies that depend on our supply system, depend on jobs, American jobs, of supplying the systems.
Without objection.
Thank you. So with that, Mr. Chairman, this was developed also in concert with Secretary Hegseth and Secretary Rubio, and supports President Trump's April 19th executive order of how to reform foreign defense sales to improve speed and accountability. The changes that are made as far as effectiveness goes, it would reduce FMS notifications by about 15%, still having 85%. Again, these figures have not been adjusted for decades. And then as far as the direct commercial sales, it would reduce about 30 to 40% reduction. And with that, I think it's absolutely incredibly important that we increase the speed and accountability of our foreign partners, because right now what happens is our foreign partners pay for it up front. We assuredly will deliver it late, and whatever we do deliver will be obsolete. And in this changing environment, our allies matter, our ability to fight effectively matters, and our ability to make sure we support national strategic policy is what we should be looking at. And I urge your support. I will be calling a recorded vote.
Very good. Any further discussion of the bill? Seeing none. Does any member wish to offer an amendment? Seeing none. There being no further amendments, I move that the committee report H.R. 3613 to the House with a favorable recommendation. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed signify by saying no.
No.
In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the motion is agreed to.
Mr. Chairman, I request a recorded vote.
A roll call vote has been requested. Pursuant to the chair's previous announcement, this vote will be postponed. Thank you. Pursuant to notice, I now call up H.R. 4215, the International Traffic in Arms Regulations Licensing Reform Act. The bill was circulated in advance, and the clerk shall designate the bill.
H.R. 4215 to require the Secretary of State to promulgate expedited and fixed timelines for the decision-making process to license the export.
Without objection, the first reading is dispensed with, and the bill is considered read and open to amendment at any point. And I will now recognize myself in support of this bill. America's foreign defense sales programs are known for slow timelines and an opaque process, unfortunately. There is often little clarity about how different foreign partners are prioritized, which can lead to frustration and confusion from allies as they seek to procure U.S. origin defense articles. The inefficiency forces our partners to consider turning to other countries to source their capabilities. The direct commercial sales process presents a quicker, more straightforward pathway for our allies and partners to purchase U.S. technology. The U.S. authorized over $200 billion in DCS sales in FY 2024, a significant increase from 2023, and over $80 billion more than FMS sales. These numbers show that DCS is the future of arms sales process. But more needs to be done to streamline DCS to ensure the U.S. can remain the partner of choice for foreign origin defense technology. Mr. Baumgartner's legislation would codify President Trump's April 4 executive order to establish a list of priority partners for certain defense sales, and would create a time-bound process for approving DCS cases. This will increase speed and efficiency in the DCS process and ensure our partners and allies are able to continue procuring U.S. origin defense equipment in a timely manner. Do any other members seek recognition? Ranking Member Meeks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. H.R. 4215 seeks to improve the processing of direct commercial sales of defense articles to our allies and partners. And while I have disagreements with the Trump administration and my colleagues on the other side of the aisle regarding how the United States should pursue and better administer security assistance as only one component of our foreign policy, I do agree Congress should take the steps to support our allies and partners getting defense articles they need in a timely manner. This bill will institute clearer timeframes for the licensing decisions made by the State Department for direct sales of defense items by private firms to foreign buyers. While large systems like aircraft, ships, tanks, and missiles are principally provided via the Foreign Military Sales, or FMS, process, a number of important items such as small arms, vehicles, radars, and other equipment are transferred via direct commercial sales. These items are often vital to our partners and allies to replenish their military stocks and defensive capabilities. While the vast majority of such proposals for export sale are processed and licensed in the expeditious manner, foreign partners often seek greater speed and clarity regarding the process. This bill simply institutes reasonable timeframes of up to 60 days for a licensing decision to be made. This does not preordain an outcome. The State Department can still either return such licenses for adjustment or modification, or reject the requested license outright. These are options available now and will still be under this bill. Importantly, the bill also does not alter or undermine congressional oversight over direct commercial sales. While I have numerous concerns with other areas of arms sales and security assistance policies of this administration, including President Trump's executive order on arms sales, I support efforts to provide our allies and partners with improved timeliness and processing for defense articles they need for our shared national security goals. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back the balance of my time.
Ranking member yields. Representative Self is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I certainly applaud the efforts of my colleague, Mr. Baumgartner, and I certainly support this bill, but this is only one of many actions we need to take for the U.S. Industrial base and the European industrial base because we have, for instance, to Mr. Meek's point, we're adding a factory simply for 155 artillery rounds, and there is a search around the world for them. So while I applaud this bill, we've got a lot of work to do in Congress to encourage and support the defense industrial base. And with that, I ask my colleagues to support this bill, and I yield back.
Representative Yields. Any other members seek recognition? Representative Baumgartner.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think this is one of the most important bills that will be considered in the 119th Congress. America today faces a more complex security environment than any time since World War II. One need only look at imperialist China, militant Russia, Iran supporting terrorist actors across the globe, and North Korea rattling its nuclear saber, transnational terrorist groups, drug traffickers. It is a dangerous, dangerous world out there. And increasing the amount of American foreign military sales not only helps our allies help us deal with these challenges, it also helps us create new allies and allies that are better integrated into our military apparatus when and if we do need to take action. It also is tremendously important to our economic growth and a real opportunity. Unfortunately, today, our military sales process is mired in red tape and bureaucracy and is stuck in the mud. Fortunately, this bill is an important part of the solution. H.R. 4215, the International Traffic in Arms Regulation Licensing Reform Act, is a bill aimed at cutting through the bureaucracy and red tape that slows down our ability to support key security partners around the world. Our current arms export licensing system is based on outdated Cold War era rules and is far too slow, far too opaque, and far too risk adverse to address the complex threats our nation faces today. Right now, each license application for direct commercial sales is reviewed on a case-by-case basis without priority, again, without priority or expedited consideration for American allies. This approach creates unnecessary delays and can inadvertently hinder U.S. national security interests. We must prioritize these sales in a strategic fashion. And our partners cannot afford to wait years for approval, and they shouldn't have to. My bill would address this very issue by setting strict timelines for licensing decisions and prioritizing applications that involve key partners and allies, all while strengthening our defense industrial base, an issue which Congressman Self just spoke very eloquently to. I want to especially thank Congressman Zinke for his leadership and for our Arms Sales Task Force for driving this bill forward. It demonstrates to our allies that the United States will have their back, not just in the world, not just in word, but in action. Let's make America and the world safer, and let's make our economy stronger. I urge my colleagues to support HR 4215 and support this critical step towards a faster, more reliable arms sale transfer process. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I yield back.
Is there any further discussion? There being no further discussion of the bill, the committee will move to consideration of amendments. Does any member wish to offer an amendment? There being no amendments, I move that the committee report H.R. 4215 to the House with a favorable recommendation. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the motion is agreed to.
Mr. Chair, I request a roll call vote, recorded vote.
A roll call vote has been requested pursuant to the chair's previous announcement. This vote will be postponed. Pursuant to notice, I now call up H.R. 4140, the Burma Genocide Accountability and Protection Act. The bill was circulated in advance, and the clerk shall designate the bill.
H.R. 4140 to provide protection, support, and humanitarian assistance to Rohingya refugees and internally displaced people in Burma.
Without objection, the first reading is dispensed with, and the bill is considered read and open to amendment at any point. Without objection, the Meeks amendment in the nature of a substitute circulated to members in advance shall be considered as read and will be treated as original text for the purposes of amendment. I now recognize myself in support of the bill. I want to thank Ranking Member Meeks and Chairman Emeritus McCall, Representative Barra, Representative Huizenga, for introducing the Burma Gap Act. For too long, the world has watched as Rohingya people have focused unspeakable horrors, genocide, mass rape, torture, and forced displacement. All that at the hands of the Burma military. This isn't history, it's happening as we speak. This bill sends a clear message: the United States will not stand by while war criminals rule with impunity. It calls genocide what it is. It backs justice with action, funding investigations, supporting survivors, and holding perpetrators accountable. It empowers Rohingya voices and demands that any future Burma include them as equal citizens, not stateless victims. Over 600,000 Rohingya remain trapped in Burma. This bill gives them hope and the tools to rebuild their lives. It also confronts Burma's military junta head-on, isolating it diplomatically and economically until democracy is restored. This is a test of our values. If we believe in human rights and justice and dignity, then we should pass this piece of legislation. The time for silence in this matter is over, and I urge every member to stand up with a yes vote. Any other members seek recognition? Representative Meeks.
Let me thank you, Mr. Chairman, for marking up my bill, the Burma Gap Act. And I want to thank all the co-sponsors, especially co-lead Representative McCall and original co-sponsor Representatives Barra and Huizenga. This bill passed our committee last Congress, and I hope this year we can get it signed into law. After years of congressional pressure to investigate the Burmese military's violence against the Rohingya in March 2022, the State Department made an official determination that members of the Burmese military committed genocide and crimes against humanity against Rohingya. According to former Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, the Burmese military's attack forced nearly 100,000 Rohingya to flee to Bangladesh in 2016 and killed more than 9,000 Rohingya and forced an additional 740,000 to flee the following year. Unfortunately, the violence hasn't ceased. In 2021, the Burmese military conducted a coup, imprisoned much of Burma's civilian government, and went to war against its own people. Around 600,000 Rohingya remain in Burma's Rakhine state and face violence, starvation, and worse. As violence continues within Burma and more innocent civilians flee to camps in Bangladesh, Thailand, and other neighboring nations, international assistance has failed to keep up with the growing humanitarian need. The bill continues U.S. focus on Burma crisis and provides support for a Rohingya community that still faces violence and repression. The bill calls for a holistic strategy and authorizes the special representative and policy coordinator for Burma to manage the complicated, multi-dimensional challenges across the East Asia Pacific and South and Central Asian bureaus in the absence of a U.S. ambassador in Burma. It authorizes funding for protection efforts and justice and accountability programs and calls on the administration to continue contributing to critical humanitarian efforts. And finally, it calls on the administration to continue the bipartisan policy of refusing to recognize the Burmese military and state administrative council as Burma's legitimate government. By voting for this bill, our committee will make it clear that the United States will hold the murderous junta accountable. We make clear that we stand with Rohingya and all the Burmese people who continue to face violence today, and we make clear that we want to see a democratic and inclusive Burma that Rohingya can safely call home. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Any other members seek recognition? Representative Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I support Ranking Member Meek's legislation, H.R. 4140, which seeks to provide support to Rohingya refugees who have fled the country due to the genocidal policies of the Burmese government, as well as to hold accountable those Burmese government and military officials responsible for this genocide. The Rohingya, as we all know, are an ethnically distinct, predominantly Muslim group who have, by and large, been pushed out of their homelands and into neighboring Bangladesh. Truly, the actions of the Burmese government and their military are extraordinarily reprehensible and support the designation of genocide, which former Secretary of State Antony Blinken previously announced. To the Rohingya people, we need to say with one voice, you are not forgotten. And to the other oppressed people of Burma, including the Chin, the Karen, and many of whom are Christian, I would also add, you are not forgotten either. I yield back.
Any further discussion of the bill? Seeing none. Being no further discussion of the bill, the committee will move to consideration of amendments. Does any member wish to offer an amendment? Seeing none. Being no amendments, I move that the committee report H.R. 4140 as amendment to the House with a favorable recommendation. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the motion is agreed to.
Roll call vote.
A roll call vote has been requested pursuant to the chair's previous announcement. This vote will be posted. Pursuant to notice, I now call up H.R. 2633, the U.S. South Africa Bilateral Relations Review Act of 2025. The bill was circulated in advance, and the clerk shall designate the bill.
H.R. 2633, to require a full review of the bilateral relationship between the United States and South Africa and identify South African government officials and ANC leaders eligible for the imposition of sanctions and for other purposes.
Without objection, the first reading is dispensed with, and the bill is considered read and open to amendment at any point. And I now recognize myself in support of the bill. I want to voice my strong support for H.R. 2633, the U.S.-South Africa Bilateral Relations Review Act, and U.S. interests. Even more alarming has been South Africa's posture following the October 7th Hamas attacks on Israel. The ANC's refusal to acknowledge those atrocities, its direct engagement with Hamas leadership, and its politicized case against Israel at the ICJ reflects a government that has turned away from principle and from its traditional role as a bridge between the global South and democratic norms. South Africa or any nation cannot conduct themselves in such a manner and expect the same quality of relationship with the United States of America. H.R. 2633 requires the administration to provide clarity It mandates a full, comprehensive review of bilateral relationship between our two countries. It requires the President to certify whether South Africa has engaged in activities undermining the United States, national security, or foreign policy interests, and requires a classified report identifying South African individuals eligible for sanctions based on corruption or human rights abuses. These are practical, measured steps to ensure our policy reflects our values. I urge my colleagues to support this bill, not to sever ties with South Africa, but to reset the expectations that we have. We owe it to the American people and to the South African people to take these concerns seriously, and I thank you all for hearing my remarks. Does the ranking member have any comments? Ranking member is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. South Africa acts as a leader, not only among African countries, but also on the world stage. As we have seen this year with the country's G20 presidency, we have a long history of partnership between our countries that I hope to see continue in the future, including with a successful handover as the United States assumes the G20 presidency next year. Unfortunately, this bill will not help to deepen or further that partnership. Instead, I believe it sets us down the wrong path with respect to our relationship if he chooses. He doesn't need this legislation to do it. And let's be honest, President Trump has already disproportionately targeted South Africa. He's done this by trying to embarrass President Ramaphosa and the Oval Office with faulty evidence of purported atrocities in the country, by instituting an executive order cutting all U.S. assistance to the country and putting it in a place where special refugee resettlement programs for Afrikaners. And at the same time, he's blocking the resettlement of literally all other refugees to the United States. Refugees fleeing genocide in Sudan, not allowed. Refugees fleeing Russian bombardments in Ukraine, not allowed. Refugees fleeing political persecution in Venezuela, not allowed. This is glaring hypocrisy, and I do not believe Congress should further enable or double down on President Trump's misguided approach. When we disagree with our partners, including on the continent of Africa, we should handle that responsibly by using diplomacy and presenting convincing arguments. Unfortunately, this bill fails to do that. So I strongly oppose this legislation and urge all of us to look for future opportunities to steer the United States-South Africa relations in a more productive direction. With that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Is there any further discussion? Representative Jackson is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Which Jackson, sir?
Ronnie Jackson.
The senior Jackson.
The one I was looking. I thought I made eye contact with the one I wanted, but next time
Yes, sir.
I'll make it more clear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for holding this important markup today and allowing us for swift consideration of my bill, the South Africa Bilateral Relations Review Act. For decades, South Africa has enjoyed a rich partnership with the United States, particularly in terms of trade, counterterrorism cooperation, and global health. Recently, however, South Africa has abandoned America and our allies and increasingly aligned itself with our adversaries like China, Russia, Iran, and Iranian military proxies like Hamas. South Africa also hosts Confucius Institutes, cooperates with PRC's Belt and Road Initiative, conducts military exercises with China and Russia, and is involved in efforts to degrade the U.S. dollar in the global monetary system. If strengthening ties with our adversaries wasn't enough, South Africa is systematically going after our partners and allies, downgrading Taiwan's presence in the country, falsely accusing the State of Israel of genocide at the illegitimate International Criminal Court, and mimicking Iran's disgusting dismissal of the atrocities committed by Hamas on October the 7th. Domestically, extreme politicians from the African National Congress, or ANC, have led efforts to target Afrikaners. These actions cannot go unanswered. South Africa and the ANC must be held accountable, and it is imperative that we reevaluate our bilateral relationship to ensure it still aligns with our strategic national security objectives. My bill, the U.S.-South Africa Bilateral Relations Review Act, will provide the President and the Secretary of State with the tools needed to conduct a full review of the U.S.-South Africa bilateral relationship and determine whether South Africa has engaged in activities that undermine United States national security or foreign policy interest. In addition, my bill will give the Trump administration the authorities needed to identify and sanction corrupt officials of the ANC and continue to align with China, Iran, Russia, and have abandoned the United States in the process. President Trump has already shown tremendous leadership on this issue, eliminating aid or assistance to South Africa and working to help resettle persecuted farmers outside of South Africa. The U.S.-South Africa Bilateral Relations Review Act will expand on the President's efforts to hold bad actors accountable while promoting our national security and supporting our partners and our allies. I encourage every member of this committee to support my legislation, and with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Any further discussion?
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Jacobs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. While I too have expressed concerns with South Africa's engagement with Russia, I do not agree with this bill's approach. As the ranking member of the Subcommittee on Africa, I hear constantly from leaders in the Global South that they do not want to be forced to choose between the U.S. and Russia or the U.S. and the PRC. One incredibly successful program of the United States in South Africa is AGOA, which has created jobs and strengthened U.S. soft power in the country, which we know is critical given the economic challenges everyday South Africans face. However, this administration has completely undermined this long-standing bipartisan program's implementation through its slapping of 10% tariffs on all countries and has threatened to increase the tariffs even more. Continuing to undermine this law would be a mistake, including cutting off South Africa's eligibility. I think it's important that we do not punish everyday South Africans for actions of their government that some of us may disagree with. The certification section of this bill also duplicates an existing annual review under the AGOA Act and is unnecessary. The U.S. government already has a process to consider all of these factors and determine AGOA eligibility. I oppose this bill, and I urge my colleagues to do the same.
I yield myself such time as I may consume 5 minutes. I rise in strong support of the legislation. I want to thank Dr. Jackson for this bill. I think it's long overdue. Thank you for it. I do wish to highlight one provision of the bill which identifies the Chinese Communist Party's ongoing efforts to bully Taiwan and to pressure the South African government into downgrading Taiwan's representative office and move it from Pretoria to Johannesburg. The unrelenting pressure that the CCP wages against Taiwan on multiple fronts is part of a broader strategy to wear down and conquer the frontline democratic partner of the United States. Indeed, tomorrow, on July 23rd, the Congressional Executive Commission on China, which I co-chair, will be holding a hearing entitled Stand with Taiwan, Countering the PRC's Political Warfare and Transnational Repression. The CCP's actions in South Africa is yet another front in this larger campaign against Taiwan. I would note with deep concern that on July 18th, South African Deputy President Paul Mashatile concluded a visit to China, and then yesterday, South Africa's Department of International Relations and Cooperation, or DIRCO, issued a statement containing retroactive references with regards to the Taipei Liaison Office in the Republic of South Africa, the officially mutually agreed upon name of Taiwan's representative office. To the government of South Africa, I wish to reiterate that the United States Congress is viewing this very closely and that any changes from what has been the status quo would be viewed very negatively. It's a core concern, U.S. concern, that democratic countries do not acquiesce and cower to the demands of the Chinese Communist Party. Let's not forget, the Chinese Communist Party is a dictatorship run by Xi Jinping, who is committing genocide as we meet in this hearing or today against the Uyghurs, the Muslim Uyghurs, and a myriad of human rights abuses are committed each and every day by that Chinese Communist Party. We are also watching this very closely because it impacts South Africa's trustworthiness as a partner. South Africa signed an agreement with Taiwan in 1997 by which it agreed to let Taiwan have a representative office in Pretoria, with its diplomats accorded certain rank and privileges. Any unilateral attempt to break this agreement would be unacceptable. I want to commend the Democratic Alliance, which is a member of the Government of National Unity, in its effort to stand up for the democratic Taiwan and push back against the pro-CCP actors in the government who seek to acquiesce to Chinese demands. And to the extent that the African National Congress is seeking to silence the Democratic Alliance reformist voice in the ongoing national dialogue currently underway, this too has now gotten the attention of the U.S. Congress. It is my hope that Taiwan and South Africa can return to the status quo, which was legally binding by their agreement, and that they reject any pressure by the Chinese Communist Party. Is there any further discussion? Mr. Jackson.
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Meeks, I rise today in strong opposition to H.R. 2633, the U.S. House-South African Bilateral Relations Review Act of 2025. This resolution does absolutely nothing to advance our bilateral relations with South Africa and, in fact, threatens to undermine it at a time when strengthening its relationship is crucial. This bill proposes a full review of our relationship with South Africa, and must I say, it's less than 30 years old before there was a segregated, apartheid-backed South African government that the United States was on the wrong side of the people of South Africa. This bill proposes a full review of our relationship, as long as is the focus on the South African government and ANC leaders for potential sanctions. This is not diplomacy, this is coercion. And it's based on a deeply flawed premise that ignores the complexities and international relationships and significant strides we've made together. Yes, we have differences with South Africa, particularly concerning the Russia-Ukraine conflict and the Israel-Hamas conflict. But let's be honest, South Africa's position on these conflicts is no different than some of our own allies. Are we questioning our relationship with our other allies that are Europeans? No, we continue to engage them through dialogue, seeking to win them over. Why should South Africa be treated any differently? This bill even South Africa's stance on the Israeli-Hamas conflict, accusing Israel of genocide. Yet, about 14 countries, including EU and NATO allies alike, like Spain, Italy, Ireland, are supporting South Africa's decision to file a suit in the International Criminal Court of Justice. Are we sanctioning Ireland, Spain, and Italy? The hypocrisy is glaring. Furthermore, let's not forget that President Trump himself went further than South Africa, falsely blaming Ukraine for starting the war and even accusing President Zelensky, calling President Zelensky a dictator without elections, according to the AP. This bill seeks to punish South Africa for positions, in some cases, that echo the sentiment even from within our own government or are shared by our closest allies. South Africa regards its bilateral relationship with the United States as founded on mutual respect and shared values for democracy and liberty. They are open and willing to deepen and expand cooperation through robust engagement. President Ramaphosa has recently dispatched cabinet members to Washington, D.C. for working visits, and meeting requests are being submitted to members of Congress from both sides of the aisle. The effort to reset strained relations are already underway. Congress must also allow diplomacy to play a central role in resolving political differences based on principles of international law, mutual respect for sovereignty. Such engagements will build upon our recent meetings with President Trump and President Ramaphosa. Consider our economic ties. South Africa is our largest U.S. trading partner in Africa, with a total of two-way trade that consumes over $20.5 billion in 2024. Over 600 U.S. American businesses are set up in South Africa and are being very prosperous. South Africa is a strategic partner, a strong democracy, a global voice committed to human rights. We collaborate on shared global policies, health, climate, trade, investment, education, and digital economy. Addressing challenges through mutual respect and respectful dialogues will yield enormous returns for Africa, where we have vital national security interests. The proposed H.R. 2633 will only lead to further tension and undermine the progress that's already being achieved. We cannot convince South Africa that international law doesn't matter and that only the United States law truly matters. This is not leadership, this is arrogance. I must say, as we sit here in these marbled walls of Congress and talk about a democracy, we've had less than a 30-year relationship with South Africa. This is a sovereign nation that chooses to have an independent point of view. They have suffered the most. We have been on the wrong side of exploiting them. The only people that have experienced a genocide and a dispossession of their land in South Africans have been the blacks in South Africa. There is no credibility, no truth to saying that white South Africans have experienced genocide. Those were manufactured pictures. We should have a level of humility, a level of decency, a level of integrity to stand up for what is right. South Africans have not been guilty of white genocide. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Anyone else wishing to be heard? Yes, Mrs. Jayapal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I oppose this bill. It appears to be, in large part, an attempt to punish the South African government for its advocacy for the Palestinian people at the International Court of Justice. This is particularly offensive given that Black South Africans are intimately familiar with the oppressive structures of apartheid and land expropriation. It is outrageous and horrifying to see what is happening in Gaza and the West Bank to the Palestinian people. For over a year and a half, the government of Israel has repeatedly used weapons, including many supplied by the United States, to kill people in Gaza indiscriminately, in violation of both our U.S. laws and our international humanitarian laws. In Gaza, the reported death toll has now surpassed 58,000 people, and tens of thousands more have been injured. Hundreds of thousands of homes, buildings, schools, hospitals, and religious sites have been destroyed or damaged, even when it is unnecessary to achieve Israel's stated military goals. 2 million Gazans face prolonged food shortages as the Israeli government uses hunger as a weapon of war. This is, to use Pope Leo's word, barbaric. Palestinians must make an impossible choice: starve or risk being shot while trying desperately to reach food. There is no place that is safe in Gaza, not even churches or other places that should be sanctuaries. I have repeatedly condemned Hamas's terror attacks on October 7th that killed 1,200 people, and I also immediately called for a release of all hostages. But it is unfortunately becoming clear that Netanyahu is not prioritizing the safety of the hostages and has no interest in securing a peace deal. Nor is the Israeli government's intent even simply to dismantle Hamas. Prime Minister Netanyahu and top Knesset leaders have made repeated comments that disgustingly dehumanize Palestinians, calling for Palestinians to be forcibly relocated. In fact, even the Trump administration has grown alarmed at Netanyahu's behavior, with an administration official reportedly saying Netanyahu is acting, quote, like a madman after his recent strikes on Syria. South Africa's case in front of the International Court of Justice deserves to be fairly evaluated without political pressure. If one is so convinced that this is not a genocide, why not then allow the ICJ to investigate and assess the evidence? Instead, Republicans are now using the same playbook they use in the United States to attack the court and launch outrageous attacks against South Africa to try and discredit their claims. This began with claims of a supposed genocide against white Afrikaner farmers, where even the photo that President Trump showed during these theatrics was from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, a country that is over 1,000 miles away from South Africa. And if he cared about facts, he would know that a crime report from the South African Police Service shows that only 0.1% of murders in the country have been directed towards farmers. And despite Black South Africans representing 80% of South Africa's population, they only own 4% of all farms and agricultural lands, a result of the legacy of colonial and apartheid rule that lasted until the early 1990s. Trump then made a mockery of our refugee system by granting refugee status to 59 white Afrikaners who were fleeing fabricated persecution. This group even included an individual who had published anti-Semitic claims that, quote, Jews are an untrustworthy and a dangerous group, end quote, despite statements from Secretary Rubio that our immigration policy should be based on, quote, the national interest of the United States. The hostility towards Black South Africans and opposition to the African National Congress, partly expressed by my Republican colleagues, is not unfortunately new. Nelson Mandela, who was awarded a Nobel Peace Prize for his leadership in the anti-apartheid movement, was considered a terrorist by the United States government for his activism, and he remained on the terror watch list until 2008. Since then, the United States has worked hard to deepen our strategic, political, and trade relations with South Africa. But now we are once again jeopardizing that progress. These claims of a supposed white genocide, combined with this administration's cozying up to dictators like Putin and Bolsonaro, damage not only progress, but America's credibility. I urge my colleagues to oppose this bill, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Anyone else asking to be heard? If not, there's no further discussion on the bill. The committee will move to consideration of amendments. Does any member?
This hearing will provide a greater insight into how the department's reorganization plan will change the division of labor between the so-called regional and functional bureaus, and how the President's America First foreign policy will be implemented in the field. And I will now recognize myself for an opening statement. Under the Biden administration, the State Department, in my opinion, operated without clear lines of command. I believe that it blurred responsibilities in many cases, and that it had a culture that prioritized process over the outcomes that the State Department would produce. I would use the DEI office as an example, where they were worried about what the bucket of applicants would look like rather than the outcomes of those applicants and what they were delivering for the American taxpayer. That was a direct quote from the former DEI Secretary Abercrombie Winstanley. That has changed under President Biden, President Trump, and Secretary Rubio. This committee is working to restore real command and control at the State Department, something that the Pentagon has had for decades and something that the State Department desperately needs. We are crafting the first comprehensive standalone State Department authorization bill in over 20 years. This is not meant as a gesture. It is meant as a serious institutional overhaul. We're not doing this for symbolism. We're doing it because there needs to be common sense and logic within our diplomacy. Our goal is simple: bring order, bring clarity, and bring effectiveness to a department that too often prioritized institutional interests above the American interest. A perfect example is how members of Congress, in too many cases, are more concerned about somebody being fired from the State Department after 10 or 15 years of employment, when they should be asking how productive those employees were and what were the measurable outcomes that were provided by them approving transgender operas or drag show tutorials or DEI musicals or LGBTQ comic books abroad. Under President Biden, the department suffered from a structural identity crisis. Maybe policy was delivered by one group, altered by another, and implemented by a third, often with no clear authority or accountability. Turf wars between regional and functional bureaus slowed everything down. The Undersecretary for Political Affairs is treated as first among equals. But that phrase itself reveals to me a problem. Too many equals, not enough leadership. No mission succeeds without a chain of command, and I believe that diplomacy is no exception. The State Department must operate like a strategic institution with a clear hierarchy, mission clarity, decisive leadership, and measurable outcomes. It should not be a think tank that looks at the world as an academic exercise with no measurable outcomes, and our reforms aim to correct that. Some will resist this. They'll defend the status quo as if it's sacred. But we've seen what the status quo produces: mission drift, strategic confusion, a sprawling bureaucracy that's often more focused on virtue signaling than actually projecting American strength abroad. Let us be clear, this is not about copying the Pentagon. It's about applying common sense. At DoD, policy is made at the top through a chain of command that is recognizable to everybody. At the State Department, that discipline has been missing.
We don't expect the State Department to be soldiers in uniform, but we should expect it to have a command structure that is recognizable and followed. We can't afford what has happened to happen again, not when adversaries like China and Iran are using every tool at their disposal to undermine American power. We can't have a foreign service officers that freelance social experimentation. Our vision is straightforward. Functional bureaus and undersecretaries should focus on developing policy, clear, coherent, and grounded in national interest. Regional bureaus with their area expertise should adapt and execute that policy on the ground. This creates a clear flow of authority, streamlines operations, and ensures accountability at every level. What we've had are regional bureaus providing loose oversight of embassies that frequently operate like personal fiefdoms rather than the implementing arm of the State Department. Under President Biden, we had embassies funding gender-inclusive leadership through Ultimate Frisbee in India for $100,000, or spending $425,000 to help Indonesian coffee companies be more gender and climate friendly. This hearing is part of a broader effort to realign the State Department with the mission it was meant to serve, putting America first as the State Department of the United States of America. That requires more than tweaks. It requires structural change, cultural change, and a willingness to change the old order. I want to thank our witness for appearing today. We do look forward to your insight as we take the first step towards restoring command and control, discipline, and mission focus at the United States Department of State. And in that, I now recognize my friend and my colleague, the ranking member from New York, Representative Meeks. I don't think you had much time to yield back, but thank you for relinquishing the microphone. I'm now going to recognize myself for 5 minutes of questioning. In my opening remarks, I used the term outcome a couple times. And I think that's one of the most important things to recognize about what's been lacking with the State Department and what needs to be the focus of the State Department. State Department is not a think tank. It's also not the Department of Defense. We don't have people in uniforms in the same way. But it is lacking some of the important things that the Department of Defense has. As I mentioned, a very clear hierarchy, a very clear structure that people follow in the same way. That has been lacking in the State Department. And I believe the measurable outcomes, again, have been lacking in the same way. I want to start by giving you a chance, in part, to respond to a few things, because there's been accusations made about somehow there's a lack of outcomes because of the actions taken by the Trump administration. And so my colleague said, the State Department was not properly resourced. Now, I know you were in the State Department previously in your career as well. The budget's grown by about $45 billion over the last 25 years. So when we're talking about outcomes, has the State Department been $45 billion more effective over that time?
I don't believe so, sir.
I think that's a plain way to put it. I don't believe so either. And I think objectively, I'd be hard-pressed to find somebody that could say that it has been. The State Department, it added between 2007 and 2024, 23,000 additional jobs in that window of time. You have almost 80,000 employees, and you have accusations being leveled against you that you just don't have the resources that you need. You don't have the people in place. And how on God's green earth could you get rid of 1,500 employees in this place? Well, again, we have to look at the outcomes of what was taking place. We are not a jobs program. The State Department is not. It has to be measured in outcomes. And so given that you have almost 80,000 employees, are you properly resourced, or are you lacking? Do you need to be at 90,000?
Thank you, Congressman. I would like to just respond by saying, as you alluded to in your opening statement, that reorganization has been necessary for a long time. And as I said, multiple administrations have tried and failed to do that. The Trump administration, under President Trump's leadership, under Secretary Rubio, has taken a very bold step to eliminate the redundant offices, to eliminate the redundant roles that were being played out under the previous structure, and with, as you said, an amount of employees and with the budget that could be streamlined. And so definitely the Secretary has taken steps to do that. And not just to do that, but to make sure that our foreign policy is being implemented in a way that's streamlined, that's expedient, that meets the needs, not just of our diplomatic partners, more importantly, that it's in line with our American interests, our national security interests, our economic security interests, and to ensure that the future is safer and more prosperous and more secure.
All right, thank you for those respective outcomes that you're seeking. Those are all worthy outcomes that I believe in. I wouldn't say that seeking a set number of employees is a worthy outcome. That's not a metric that I think the State Department should care about, whether it has 80,000 or whether it has 78,500. Doesn't matter. What matters are the outcomes that are achieved, and the fact of the matter is, under the Biden administration, it wasn't one or two incidents, as one of my colleagues put it, of, well, there might have been some drag shows in Ecuador, there might have been some expanded atheism in Nepal, or there might have been some little bit of transgender here. It was systemic across every continent, every country, prioritized to use the State Department for social experimentation and virtue signaling instead of measurable outcomes that made America the partner of choice, real diplomacy. And I applaud the work that's going on in the State Department to return it to what it needs to do, which is make sure that the policies being put in place are putting the United States of America first. And I'll just close my questioning by saying, I believe you put the United States of America first with the State Department by always asking the questions. What does America need from a country or region? What does that country or region want from the United States of America? And if we choose to provide something, whether it's PEPFAR or anything else, or an aid program, or, God forbid, a transgender job fair or something else stupid like that, does it get the United States of America what it needs? Because if it doesn't, then somehow we were talking past one another. We didn't have the right conversation. And I want to ensure that you have the right conversations to get this country what it needs.